All right, everyone. Welcome once again to the Faces of Business. I'm your host, Damon Pistolka, and with me today, I've got our special guest, Mark Scrimenti. Mark, welcome.
Thanks, Damon. It's great to be here.
Well, man, I am really excited to have you here because we are going to nerd out on e-commerce. We're going to talk about stuff that and we're going to talk about scaling an e-commerce business from 8 figures to 9. And now, this is cool. You got the experience. You were in there and really putting your back into it and doing it. And I'm excited to to let people hear more about it.
I love it. I'm looking forward to talking to you about it.
Yeah, man. So let's start out like I always like to with guests. So first of all, if you're listening on LinkedIn now or Facebook, one of those platforms there, even on Twitter, I can hit you back on Twitter too. But if you're listening on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, let me know where you're listening from. If you got questions for us, do that. Just give us a shout out. We'll get you up on the screen so you can tell us what you want to do. I just got a text from my kid. Sorry, but I lost focus for a second. My phone popped up and I need to shut the thing off. But so we got we're going to be talking about some things. So people about the e-commerce, we're going to start out. Let's talk about your background and let's let people understand a bit more about Mark and how you got into e-commerce.
Okay. So that goes back a ways. I started out as a technical writer. That was my first job. So we're talking like mid-90s. I finished graduate school, background in English and a master's degree in professional writing, creative person. But I have to make a living. So I got into technical writing, which got me into technology, which got me into a consulting agency. And then the internet came around. And I'm like, that's the coolest thing, like that medium, that's where I want to be. So as soon as I could, I got to an internet startup, and this was like the late 90s by now. And we were building a sales process automation tool and a number of cool things. But from that experience, I got into UX, front end design and coding, content management. I was always a writer, so I did a lot of marketing, copywriting, and things like that. And I did that for a couple of years. Then I went on my own for 4 years, and I built websites. And so I learned how to code. I did all the marketing content and strategy. So it was kind of a one-stop shop for mostly small businesses, nonprofits, solopreneurs. And, I would get them a basic site. I would do the front-end coding. If I needed any heavy-duty back-end coding, I'd hire a real developer. But that's how I got started. And then, in 2006, I was ready to do something at a bigger scale. I felt kind of isolated working alone all the time, or working from my apartment all the time. At the time, we're still in an apartment. And a friend of mine was working at this e-commerce company, music company, and they were an early pioneer in e-commerce. So they started in 96, which was pretty early and one of the first in the industry. And at that point, I said, hey, you think you could use anybody with my background? And he's like, I don't know. And passed my resume on to the CEO. I talked to the CEO for about 3 hours. He asked a ton of questions. Within like a week I was working there. He gave me sort of a 6-month trial contract, and I seemed to earn his trust. That was an interesting assignment involving a transition. And then and that's how I started there. And then later on, I found out, he told me that he had been looking for a right-hand man, but because he was kind of done with the day-to-day operation. So this is the founder CEO I could talk about later. And then he just kind of threw me at one thing after the other. And I had the chance to grow and try out different things, learn, and my responsibility just increased over time.
Yeah. So you basically kind of started at a ground level and worked your way into more of a COO level or something like that in this organization.
That's right.
That's really pretty incredible, dude.
It was fun. It was a great opportunity. Yeah. I mean, I think I was fortunate to have the opportunity. It wouldn't happen all the time or in every case, but it seemed to be a good fit for me. And I think what made that possible for me was a hunger to learn, and that entrepreneurial spirit. And I got to tell you, working for myself was a great setup for this, because when you're working for yourself, you got to figure everything out on your own. I mean, obviously you're drawing on, friends and connections for, as resources, but nobody's going to do it but you. And you develop this mindset of like, I'm just going to figure it out. I don't know how to code, but I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to do it. And so that's what I brought with me to e-commerce. And I think that really helped a lot, because he kind of threw me into things I'd never done before: call center operations. I was doing some things I'd done before, a lot of marketing, creative direction. But eventually it became, bigger and bigger, and it was, stuff that was new to me, but I was willing to do it because I had that mindset.
Yeah. That's cool. So moving into this role, then, as you saw more and more of the business, and you're sitting there, was the growth hard to come by, or was it kind of one of those things in the beginning where it was just growing so fast you were just trying to keep up?
No, it was kind of stuck. So just a little company history. Again, early internet e-commerce company at that time, like in '96, you had to have a brick and mortar store to be considered legitimate. So they had a brick and mortar store, but their long-term play was always to be online. And had built up the company to 40 million in sales, the founder CEO. But they got some early funding from Paul Allen. Mm-hmm. The CEO was a uniquely talented person, data scientist, math and statistics guy. He read a few books on PHP and then built the first website. Not your classic CEO by any means. Wow. But he was able to build a company up to 40 million, but then it kind of plateaued from there. And he was kind of done with the day-to-day operation by the time I got there. And, the people stuff he didn't want to deal with. And really, there was no process in place. There was no structure and process. This is one of the first things I noticed. It was, it was arbitrary. Like either the CEO had an idea and we're going to do that thing, or somebody else was coming up with an idea, but there was no process in place. So one of the first things I did was introduce Agile Scrum. And I had read about it, and I'm mm-hmm. like, the whole iterative process made sense to me. It seems very intuitive. And, I'd worked with it previously. So I got my Scrum Master training. I became the first Scrum Master. I got my certification, and then, eventually handed that off to somebody else. But that was a big step in bringing focus and direction, the ability to plan and to prioritize work and to estimate ROI and to, look at trade-offs. Yeah. None of that stuff was really formalized. And the other thing about this company, since it was an early e-commerce pioneer, is that all the software, all the systems were homegrown, and for better and worse. And so, you and I have talked before how there are these geological strata of, like technical infrastructure, and as one regime changed, after another, and it was, it made it very hard to plug in off-the-shelf products as a result. I was, as time went on, this is a little bit further down in the story, I was always looking for opportunities to plug in an off-the-shelf product and not reinvent the wheel. Yeah. But when you've got this system that's cobbled together, and it was built around an old catalog order processing system called Ecometry. So it was like a Franken system with, a giant octopus with inputs and outputs. It's really hard to find, points of extensibility, places to plug in off-the-shelf software. So we ended up building most of the stuff ourselves. Again, for better and worse. But so when I became the first Scrum Master, I designed this project management tool. And, as I was thinking about talking to you, one thing that came to mind is that, now, the industry has matured so much. Nowadays, there's a tool for that, Yes. There's a tool for everything. And in those days, like 2007, there were tools. And Jira may have been around in its early stages, for example, but it was just easier for us to create it ourselves, and it was customized for our own purposes. So that kind of helped us with the project process. And then, from there, there was a lot of consolidation because we're moving from a catalog mindset to a digital marketing mindset. And that was also a big shift. And in this industry, musical equipment, it wasn't it wasn't really an early adopter industry. So they were slow to spend money on online advertising. They were still spending money in catalogs, and we were still producing catalogs at the start. So we had two brands. We had two online retail brands, and the origins of that go back to the fact that early SEO, SEM, you wanted to be number 1 and 2 in the listings, and it was easier just to create a second website, and even if the content was duplicate, and it was. And you'd get that 1 and 2 bookings, so you'd get them either way. That's why that second site came into being. But of course, over time, it didn't work like that anymore.
Yeah.
We're penalized. We eventually killed off the second brand, and that was one of the things that I advocated for too. And that's probably a recurring theme as I talk about this. Is like you got to know what to kill. If it's not bringing the focus that you need.
Well, and you make such a great point about the market and just the maturity of the industry, because you're talking about it's 2007 and 8, that's 13, 14 years ago. That's, the market was way, way, way different back then. I mean, you talk about just the competitiveness of a online retailer is nothing compared to now.
Right. Yeah. And it doesn't seem that long ago. But when you think about it and how much has changed, it's a long time ago in terms of e-commerce. The principles are the same, but again, it's just more mature and it's more stable too. I mean, we could talk about that too, like, the big algorithm changes of 2011 and 2012 for Google. There was Panda and Penguin, and how that really shook up the landscape in terms of SEO. Those two changes were meant to get rid of content farms and black hat linking, and which were still a thing then. So there, and now that stuff doesn't fly anymore. But that's what you were up against, and then suddenly, depending on how you built your SEO, whatever your strategy was, you might have to redo the whole thing based on that algorithm change. Yeah, and I think that stabilized more as the industry's matured.
Yeah, I know. Even now, though, it's still the algorithm changes will produce quite drastic changes in your organic and just your natural flow of traffic to your websites. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you got to stay on top of it all the time.
That's for sure. Yeah, that's the best way to say it. Yeah. So interesting stuff. So you brought up a couple things about knowing when to kill things. We'll talk about that. that because I'm sure that as you grow from about 40 million to 3-4 times that, there had to be things like your customer service and some of these other places, like at 30 million, you probably could have a handful of customer service, 10 customer service people or whatever it was. But when you get to 3-4 times that, you mentioned something before we got on. You said call center. So I mean, how many people? Just the difference in scale on a customer service team from the size where you started and where you finished had to be massive.
Yeah, it was. And the call center was our biggest team. I think it was maybe 35 or 40 when I started, and it was over 100 when I left. And we thought it might scale proportionally to revenues, it like 1-to-1, but it wasn't exactly that. We were able to gain some efficiencies. But yeah, the call center was interesting because I had never done call center work before. So that was something I started out, doing marketing, and we had a content site that showed, it was just a music gear content site, and had great content on it. It had tons of videos, product reviews, demos, tutorials, artist interviews, product releases,
Wow.
that kind of stuff. All the creative direction. And then I introduced Agile Scrum. That's I mentioned that already. But then I inherited the call center, and the call center was kind of in disarray. There was high turnover, low morale, and so what I did was just meet with people, took them out in groups, took them to lunch, just listened. What's working for you, what isn't working for you. How can we help? And then I sat with everybody and I watched what they did in person. And then I looked at a ton of data. We had a lot of data to look at. Call center is great for data, lots of metrics. And then we started making changes. And part of that was again, having a lot of homegrown systems. We could make the changes ourselves. So it was changes in process, changes in training. We changed our metric. We had a metric for measuring performance, everything, company mission statement, customer bill of rights, employee bill of rights. And we saw some definite improvements. We changed our progressive discipline policy, and that made a difference too. So like a combination of standardization. We standardized a lot of things, but we also had flexibility. So like striking that balance between standardization and flexibility. And over time, we affected a real cultural change where the best performers stayed for a long time, and they recruited their friends.
Yeah.
And our customer service ratings were always outstanding. So like we'd win the biz rate platinum seal of excellence every year, and that's the top few % of people of online retailers in North America. I think one big change though, and that was really a big battle to fight, was pay. Our CSRs had not gotten a pay raise in like 10 years, 11 years. And they were making $9.50 per hour base. And we didn't have a commission. We did have a bonus structure though, and that was based on this metric that had sort of a 3/8 service, 5/8 sales component to it. The owners wanted to see immediate return on investment if we were going to raise the wage. Like we want to see higher net GP per call. Can you ensure that we'll see that? I was like, no, I can't ensure that. But what I can, what we did end up seeing was just, much greater stability, higher retention, higher employee satisfaction. We did see increases in net GP over time. But that stability and the happy employees really made for better customer service, and then just I think that was the return that we got from that, and it was worth it. So it wasn't as easy as saying, look, if we could raise the wages, will everybody perform better? What we ended up doing there was a lot of cross training. We liked utility players, so that we could throw people on a problem as it arose in real time. Overflow calls. That combined with specialization.
Well, and what you're saying though too is, and what's often not accounted for as business is the cost of turnover. The cost of turnover is huge, but it's real hard to measure, right? It is, because you don't have enough customer service people or enough people to take orders. How do you go? Is it lost sales? How do you know? And it's not something that's real easy. And then how much do you lose because you're getting people up to speed the first X days, X months, and all that accounts towards extra costs and lost money, lost productivity that it adds up, but it's not easy to add up.
Right. Unemployment insurance taxes. I mean,
Yep.
those multiplied. And yeah, just the service level gaps. You know, if you've got 40 people and 4 people quit, in one day, you're screwed. You know, when you have a spike, and how many lost sales result of that, and you can tell. You can look at your abandons.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So now, did you? Yeah. Anyway, so you went. I won't get too deep into the customer service thing. I just think that in e-commerce businesses, that the customer service department, if they're looking at it right, is really a sales channel.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sales channel where somebody wants your product so badly that they're talking to you, or they've got a problem that if you solve it and do a really good job, you have the opportunity to keep them as a long-term customer.
Right.
And I just think it's such a key place. And like you mentioned, a couple things: training and standardization, actually a few things, and then you add pay, because I think, and you ended up saying, you said that there was a incentive-based compensation for them too.
Mm-hmm.
And you raised the pay because it is such a critical role. That we were in a company a few years ago where it literally was almost nothing as far as sales in the first, when we got there, and it was $2.5–3 million in sales just in customer service. 2 years later, 18 months later, something like that, because you just keep refining and training and incentivizing and showing your customer service people how to help people get what they want.
Right.
And it really, you can turn it into a lot of good revenue.
We discovered through trial and error, like, who were the best salespeople. And it wasn't entirely trial and error, but and then of course we routed them, the calls, but
Mm-hmm.
And then we try to reproduce what they did, and a lot of knowledge sharing. Some people just have the knack, and our CEO had this idea that if one person can perform at this level, everyone can perform at the level.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, that's not true. There is some art to selling and some gift. We can try and spread that knowledge out as much as possible. But but
it is.
These are not machines.
It is, that's for sure. It is, and your training can only go so far, and the people themselves take it from there. And there's some people are just better at it than others. Well, that's right. Cool. So now, in this business, did you have product on site then? Did you have warehouses or multiple warehouses, or how did that work?
We had multiple warehouses. 3.
Okay. How many square feet approximately?
I don't know. They were large. We had one in New Jersey, one in Mississippi outside of Memphis, and one in Las Vegas.
Okay, so you hit across the country like that to get faster deliveries.
Right. Yeah. So our delivery, like, we had 96% of the country covered on 2-day ground.
Yeah.
So our shipping was really outstanding, and that became a big selling point for us. People, we could get stuff there within 2 days for most people without extra cost.
Yeah. Well, and that's a big deal. I mean, you look at today at Amazon Prime, how much money do they invest in setting it up to get stuff there the next day or the day after? It's a huge thing in e-commerce. And as you grow and scale like that, those multiple warehouses really allow you, like you said, you're 96% second day across the United States. That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a big deal, especially when you can say that.
Right.
Yeah. And your customers get used to it too. And then somebody else trying to get into it, and you go, oh, it's going to be 5-6 days. I think it's the end of the world.
Right.
And they won't buy from them. Well, that's cool. So when you were looking at the business overall, and you were sitting, you kind of getting going down the road here, what were some of the biggest structural challenges? I mean, because I'm trying to imagine when you go 3-4 times larger like that, did you have a department that was under one person and it was fine, a couple departments, then all of a sudden you grew and now you had to have multiple people managing and and multiple people managing where you have managed before, or were you able to keep the structure still really flat as you grew?
The structure stayed pretty flat. At some point, we moved up, so like created an extra layer of management.
Yeah.
And so I had 3 directors reporting to me.
Okay.
There were just two VPs who reported to the CEO,
Mm-hmm.
me and the VP of IT,
Yeah.
who also, so he was sysadmins, developers, and the data science team also reported to him. There are reasons why. So I'm, very much tried to break down silos as much as possible. Like going back to the call center, we banned the word department, so that people couldn't say, well, the returns department is on lunch break right now. Like that doesn't exist. Like if the returns department or the returns people aren't there, then you take the call, and one of the silos that did exist, though, was with data science, which is another subject that we can talk about. But in terms of answering your questions, in terms of the structure, I think that the structure changed organically and grew organically. So, for example, with the project team, at first I was the Scrum Master, and I was also designing products, writing requirements. And then I started hiring people to do that, so I hired a UX person. I hired a couple business analysts. We brought people up through the organization to serve in some of those roles. So it started as, I would fill in, the CEO would fill in at times. And then we started to build a team and a department. I mean, in that sense, or a team.
Yeah.
And same thing with marketing. We had that content side I mentioned, but it wasn't making any money, so eventually that, that's something else I killed. I just kind of folded that production capacity and that talent into the digital marketing team, and used that talent on the retail sites. So, for example, like with the content set, we were producing at our peak 15 pieces of content per day. So, 3 or 4 videos, and the rest were print pieces. But we developed this really productive content machine. But that content was expensive.
Yeah.
And there's the gear, the cameras, the mics. All that stuff, but plus the labor, just the labor is expensive. So, to me, it didn't make sense to be spending all that money on something that wasn't making money. And we tried to monetize the content site, but again, in our industry, nobody was buying online ads. There wasn't much of an appetite for it. So, in bringing that team together, what we found was that we had a lot of the sort of right people, wrong seats, some of the wrong seats, some of the wrong people, and this is especially early on. So we had to if we could retrain somebody, we would. We had to let go of some people. We let go of some people, but for example, early on we had merchandisers. We had product merchandisers who knew their categories, their product, guitars, drums, DJ equipment, bass, but they were working in these very long, 100-page spreadsheets, mapping keywords, to product pages. And it's like they hated it. They weren't good at it, and this is something that can be and was eventually automated. But I'm like, that's, and then they were catalog focused still, so what we needed, like, again, with this content team, we need people who could write for like online SEO friendly copy, and who also had product knowledge, but they could also do other things like write SEO copy, which can be taught to some extent. Certainly SEO writing can be taught. Writing in itself is a little bit more of a talent, I think. But you need some visual skill if you're working with the designers to build sales guides and landing pages and so forth.
Yeah. I just checking out, somebody put some comments on LinkedIn there, but it is, you bring up a good point in there. And just like you mentioned that the just keeping your pages, and I can't even imagine this because you're talking about on a system that probably was pretty manual. That's you're trying to keep your SEO working right and your keywords, and just really that had to be a ton of work for people. How many pages did the website have?
Well, we had
SKUs.
We had more like 12 to 15,000 SKUs.
Okay.
So
that's a good better way to say it.
Yeah. So that's right. It was a sprawling website. I mean, it was.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That is. We've got a few clients have had not quite that, and then I've got some that are resellers that are over 100K, and that's a different ball game though. You're with individual and this kind of products. I gotta imagine you talk about this before. You and I had talked about this before. The growth of the company as you were going through it, were there things that you found in the industry, then you go, wow, this is something that, well, if we do this, we really could grow differently or grow longer. You and I talked about financing and kind of how that helped you really launch the company
right
and into growth. Explain that a little bit and kind of how you got into that and just came around to that.
Sure. Yeah. So financing was really the biggest driver of our growth. We had a good credit. We had a good credit line and a good relationship with the bank. We paid our bills on time. I had a good controller and a good CFO. We were the only company. Nobody out there was offering just straight old payment plans. So and so what we started offering were these no interest payment plans. Now our competitors, you could get a house credit card. If you went to Guitar Center, for example, who's the 800-pound gorilla in the industry, you could apply for a house credit card, and there's a 70% rejection rate. And then, if you get the card, if you're lucky enough to get the card, they'll give you these 12, 24, and 36 month, interest-free offers. But if you're late on a payment or if you fail to make a payment, then you have this retroactive interest at 30% APR. So, a lot of people end up spending a lot more than they intended when they use that credit card. What we were offering was different. And it was, basically it's like an old-fashioned payment plan, installment plan. We had we did a ton of experimentation. So we did 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and eventually 18 payment plans. The longer the plan, the greater the risk, of course, because you're getting that fraction up front. So, and we had them set on different price ranges, different product, compositions, different brands. The higher end brands got the longer payment plans. And in some cases we could even get those brands to chip in, to kick back a percentage, because it really did juice the sales a lot. Because people, this is a passionate, these are serious hobbyists. They're passionate about music. It's a lifetime hobby, and it's an expensive hobby if you get into it. And these musicians will have, dream instruments. For let's just say a Gibson Les Paul guitar, which is a really nice guitar. And, maybe it's $1,200, but they're not going to have $1,200 at once in their pocket to spend, especially on a guitar, maybe ever, but they can afford the $100 a month. And so, this was a hypothesis. I can't take credit for that. That was our CFO in New Jersey, who, thought of it. But we had to launch that program, and we had to test it. And we didn't, when I think back, everything seems obvious in retrospect, but, we didn't know if it was going to work. We thought, it's extremely risky.
Yeah.
And are other people going to copy this? And, which of our competitors are most likely to do that? How likely are they to do that? And so forth. And how do we keep from losing our ass, in bad debt?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, we figured if you've got these, let's just say if you got enough margin to work with, let's say, you're in the 30, 40%, whatever that margin is, if you can afford a certain percentage of bad, you can afford a certain percentage of bad debt, and you have to expect that it's going to happen. There's a lot, a significant amount of it comes from, what's essentially fraud, like the one announced people who pay you that first payment and they never come back. They never intend to come back. But there's also an even larger percentage of those, people who just they make it, 3/4 of the way through, and then they can't finish. Something comes up in their lives and they're not able to pay you. They want to pay you. They may intend to pay you. So we kind of worked with them. We developed a very flexible collections system, but in terms of departmental growth or team growth, by the time I left, 20 out of those 100 people in the call center were in collections or accounts. So, there's a lot of risk in that plan. And so you really have to establish a model. And collections is kind of, can only be so successful. And that's why we call it accounts, because most people really did want to pay us back, and they're probably paying us back before they're paying their utility bill because they can't get this deal anywhere else. And they just love, they love this program. They love to be able to play it, and they want to get there. But anyway, sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Well, you're talking about this, because I think that the one thing that's really interesting now is you are on the leading edge of this. Now the payment plans in e-commerce is really common because people have seen the increase in sales, but you're one of the leaders, and you guys did it on your own dime too, didn't you?
Right.
It wasn't using an outside company, because now everybody under the sun, brick and mortar and online, has it, and it's outside companies that provide
like
it.
A firm.
A firm provides a 9 out of 10, because like Joseph Stepke that I know, he helps tons of people do that with the credit through, I think it's a SEMA or something like that. This company name that does that. But I think it's really interesting that you guys saw the opportunity, developed the opportunity, and then it really drove the growth because you knew how much that really helped your customers, the good customers, right? Because there's always going to be some, like you said, that couldn't afford it or didn't intend to afford it, and we're going to do whatever. But your customers, I assume that had to really drive some loyalty, because they knew then when they bought this guitar and they got that guitar and they wanted something else for that guitar, they could come back and get a really nice amp and do a similar thing and afford it.
Yeah, absolutely. Average orders values doubled.
Wow.
Repeat buying rates went up. Word of mouth advertising was great. And so all of that, changes everything. And it certainly changes our customer acquisition strategy too. And our, like, from an SEM standpoint, it really changes that equation, because now, all of that lowers your customer acquisition cost.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you're driving people to you because you're doing exactly what they need.
Right. And they keep coming back, and they would keep coming back as long as we had what they needed. And that's the feedback we got. So, it was tricky though. We would let out the reins and we kind of test things out. You're always trying to, ferret out, like, kind of pockets of bad debt. We developed a very sophisticated model, the 35 different variables, but as it turned out, especially because we were lending to, people, with credit scores in the 500s, sometimes the low 500s, that was, you can reduce the risk if you're only lending to people with 700 credit scores or above, but, that wasn't most of our customer base. But, we found that the way they performed with us ended up being the biggest predictor of future, reliability in terms of paying back payment plans. In other words, once they get into the system, as long as they pay you, I sort of called it like this path to citizenship, or, I mean,
Yeah.
if where you may be coming in with like no credit score or very low credit score, and but your credit with us becomes really good. I don't care, about what
The
it is
rest
with
of the
anybody
world.
else,
Yeah.
because you're because they're paying us back. So that was largely the case. But and then as you scale up, you're like, maybe we could afford 4% bad debt, because the numbers get so big,
Yeah.
but that's dangerous. They can become a slippery slope,
Yeah.
and you really got to catch it on the front end is what I was trying to say. Like, and that's where the model comes in, because, by the time it gets to collections, most of that is lost, especially at 60 days, like at
Yeah.
60 days, you may as well write it off. And the collections agency isn't going to do anything for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I said, I really think that, and when you think about the number of dollars that drove, that's really pretty amazing that you really supercharge your growth by financing to meet your customers' needs. That's something. So, yeah, and you touched on this a little bit about SEO, SEM, and that kind of stuff. So was the company spending a lot in pay-per-click during this time, or was it you were word of mouth and SEO juice got you there?
No, the company was still spending a lot. I mean, the percentage declined over time. So if you when I first started, from when I first started to when I ended, it ended up being about half. But so let's just say, to grow the company, like going back to an earlier stage, we were spending approximately 9 to 10% of revenue on SEM, and that number gradually decreased because of these other things that we're talking about, as well as because of learning, and just figuring out, how to spend your dollars more effectively.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, we tried all kinds of things in terms of SEM, all the different products. It's really driven by Google, as you know. I mean, there are plenty of other options earlier on, AdRoll, all these companies that have kind of come by the wayside or fallen by the wayside, but maybe they're still around. I don't know.
Well, and I mean, just the pure magnitude of trying to manage the amount of campaigns and the amount of things that you're trying to do on a marketing, and it had to be quite a job. And you're thinking back, the tools recently have gotten more sophisticated, and then we have the whole, we can talk about Apple for a second, but that's a whole nother can of words. But in those, 5-6 years ago, the tools weren't nearly as sophisticated, or 7 years ago, or however long ago it was, they weren't nearly as sophisticated as they are now.
Right. Well, for us, I think we did a lot. You've got to spend to learn, and that's one of the things that we realized. And sometimes even you can waste a lot of money on SEM. Right?
Wow. Yeah.
Super
fast.
You can waste a ton. I mean, now, like, about 60% of our new customers came from Google. So, it was a great source of customer acquisition for us. But what you're trying to do is, figure out like increasingly better estimates for what each keyword or ad is worth, and then, adjusting your spend on that. And, you've got to have clear business goals. And you also cannot take Google's word for anything.
No.
And you have to understand that they're optimized for their own profitability. They're not necessarily optimized for your profitability. There will be times when the two are in alignment, but there's certain tools for, by default, like certain ad products for which the default is, let's say, to optimize for clicks.
Yeah.
But you're paying for clicks. What you really want is to optimize for conversion. Yeah. And yet, and that may be a setting. In some cases, it's a setting that you can change, because they're auto optimizing.
Oh yeah.
But if you don't know that, if you're not aware of that, paying for the wrong thing and you're wasting your money. Another challenge that we faced was, 80% of our, we had hundreds of campaigns, with 15,000 SKUs. We had millions of keywords, literally millions of keywords.
Wow.
But about 80% of our budget was on long tail keywords versus like fat head terms. And we didn't bother spending on the fat head terms because they were too expensive, like Gibson guitars or something. Plus the long tail, terms are a better indicator of intent to buy. It's like more researched. It's a strong signal of intent.
You're right. It's just what you're saying is so true in these type of accounts, because you have to, you're that continual process of refining. You had to use a lot of data mining and data analytics to go, okay, this is this keyword and this is what it drove and this key and this phrase and how much it did. And then really understanding, like you said, the value of a keyword phrase and make sure you're buying it for the right amount of money.
Right. And a lot of people, this is like where, having basic data science understanding is extremely important for e-commerce. A lot of people don't really get sample size errors. Like they'll have a product out there and it gets 5 clicks and one person buys. They're like, wow, there's a 20% conversion rate. But that's just not enough data to draw that conclusion. And that's how you can spend a lot of money. You can waste a lot of money that way. And one of the problems that we had with all these long tail keywords is that is a paucity of data. So you end up having to, some of these they don't get clicked on that often. And you want at least 100 clicks or something before you start drawing any conclusions. And so you have to put them in a bucket of like products, and then you aggregate the clicks, and you bid on that level, and you continue to refine that. That's another thing that you have to work on. And the other thing is that and maybe this is obvious to people, but what is your strategy? Like, how much are you going to spend? Like, what is like on customer acquisition? And one thing that worked for us is, first of all, you gotta know what the lifetime value of a product, of a customer is based on what they buy. To the extent that you can figure that out. And if like we were willing to spend basically our profit margin up to our profit margin on the first sale to acquire a customer. So, if we could break even on that first sale to acquire a customer, it makes sense, especially if what they bought indicates that their lifetime value is going to be really high. So like, for example, we wouldn't spend a lot of money on beginner guitar kits and any keywords, related to that, because, typically beginner guitar kits are played for 3 months, and then there's stuffed underneath the bed or in the closet
and never touched again.
And very different if the first product they buy from you is a $1,200 Gibson Les Paul, and the lifetime, that potential lifetime value of that customer is much higher. So you got to be thinking in those terms.
Man, this is incredible, dude, because I hope that people that have listened to this, that are listening now and listen to it and on and off, have really tried to been able to understand the depth of this, because the stuff that you learned in this experience is invaluable going forward with e-commerce people. Because I mean, one of the things that we found in the work that we've been doing, and I've really only been in e-commerce for about 6 years now, and is that there is really no good education for e-commerce. And then you go
do it.
You have to do it. Exactly. So you have to fumble your way and bust your way through it. There's some people that have been in it long enough, like yourself, and others that really they've learned by banging their head in the wall and by refining and doing that stuff. But there's not a a school somewhere that's pumping out the best e-commerce people in the world for really much of anything.
Right.
And people that have your knowledge level in the industry are very rare. And that's why I get so excited when I talk to you, because you could tell the depth of your knowledge and the things that you're talking about. Like when we talk about correlating the purchase that they made to how much, you're going to spend for the keywords that drew them in based on it's just, that's crazy cool stuff that you have to get into if you want to really know what you're doing in a e-commerce business that's big.
Right. Attribution models,
Yeah.
like, how do you want a distributed model, right?
Yeah. It's so cool.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
cool.
there's a lot of technical stuff that it changes, and you got to stay on top of it. You need dedicated people. And that's kind of like, when you talked earlier about, the changes in structure and stuff, we moved more from like, we were all doing it ourselves to kind of, building small teams to take care of it. That was kind of the main movement over time.
Yeah. Well, you have to, because you have to have more specialists.
Yeah, you do. Like SCM, you need, you have a little team, at least.
Yeah.
But we brought everything in house, like SEO. Here's the other thing too, like Google, like spending $5 million a year or whatever. You're small time for Google. Like, that's a small account.
Yeah.
What you're going to get is you're going to get a rep who's like straight out of college, surely bright and charming, and they've been trained, but they don't know your business at all.
They can't help you.
And they don't even know Google that well. They don't even know their own tools that well. So it's best to learn it yourself. And most of the stuff is not rocket science, but it's complex enough and it changes enough that you need somebody who's dedicated to stay on top of it as it evolves.
Yeah. Well, and it's the people that are in it. It's a daily and hourly kind of thing almost. If you're launching new campaigns, it's significant amounts of money that can, if it's not done right, can go like that.
Oh yeah. We had a case where we forgot to shut off a campaign once, and we burned $40,000 in one day. But we learned a ton from it because we got a ton of clicks, and that's the thing. It's like, that lean, the lean startup thinking, like everything is a learning experience. There's no failure when everything is a learning experiment, because you just learn from it and you pivot and you move on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so good. Well, and so that's great talking about your e-commerce experience. So now what you're doing, you're a fractional COO for people now. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how you're helping people today and do that.
Thanks. I appreciate that. So today I'm working as a fractional COO, and I've got one, steady client that takes up at least half my time, and I'm looking for other clients. But I'm looking at, visionary CEOs, who need help on the, strategy and execution side, and or, businesses, could be family businesses that have they're looking to grow, but they've kind of reached, the ceiling of what they can do on their own. And they need some executive level guidance or help. But they can't afford necessarily to pay full time for a CEO or whatever, and that's okay. I can work, like 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 2 days a month, whatever it may be. But I think, especially in e-commerce, so it happens that my one client is not an e-commerce client, but I'm itching to get some e-commerce clients, because I think I can help a lot, just a broad perspective and really got my hands into a lot of different things. So definitely. I'm enjoying it. And, the business I'm working for, it's kind of a social enterprise, and I like that aspect of it too. But I'm eager to, see what else who else I might be able to help.
You can add to it. Yeah. Well, that's awesome, Mark. Well, how can people get a hold of you?
LinkedIn is always great. I'm on LinkedIn.
All right.
I could give my email address, but
Yeah,
I think LinkedIn's probably
LinkedIn. So they'll hit you up on LinkedIn, Mark, and that's what we'll do. You're mentioned in this comment or in this post already, where it will be live for as long as they keep it up, and then
Great.
we'll also have your bio in the blog post on our website, so people can get a hold of you there. And if people can't find you, they can always talk to me, because I don't have no one else with my name in the world. So if they can't find me, I don't know what.
You are unique.
Yeah, I guess, or something like that. But anyway, thanks again, Mark Scrimenti.
Oh, my pleasure.
Being on the Faces of Business again. It was so cool. I've just, man, I know we could geek out here for hours on e-commerce stuff, because we didn't even touch half the stuff we were thinking about, because, you know, you talk about the scaling of systems and, you know, get into your data science. That's just so cool, man. But thanks so much.
We could go on for hours. Hopefully we'll do it again.
We'll do it again. We'll figure out another topic that we'll do, and we'll go again. But hey, I want to say thanks, Gail Robertson, coming out of Canada, saying she's coming in late, but going back and listen. Gail, you're going to get a dose of e-commerce. That's what you're going to get. It's good stuff. But thanks so much, Mark.
Thanks, David.
Have a great rest of your week, everyone. And we will be back again tomorrow. With tomorrow morning, we've got our Exit Your Way roundtable. And then tomorrow afternoon, I'm speaking with, and as usual, I forgot who I'm speaking with tomorrow. But
it's going to be good.
It's going to be good. That's what I always say. And honest to God, every time I have my brain just goes blank. But anyway, have a great day, everyone. Mark, thanks so much. We're dropping off right now, and have a great rest of the day, everyone.
All right.